Survival horror is not usually a genre I dabble with, but when I saw the footage of Metro Exodus, I thought that looks like a really well-made game and I might just have to try it, even though I've had no previous experience with the other Metro games, and even though I'm a bit shaken up, I can say with total honesty that that was an experience. Metro Exodus is not like any game I've ever played before because it seems to combine all the elements of a horror shooter, a survival shooter, with an open world and a linear story that has branching storylines and alternate endings. A very interesting hybrid. So essentially you are Artyom, you have your wife Anna, but you're part of the Spartan squad living in the metros beneath Moscow. And that's pretty much all you get to start with, so it's definitely not going to be overly friendly if you're uninitiated and have no idea about the previous game. Now the first thing you're going to notice about Metro is it has a painful opening load system. I'm serious, I got to the point where I knew that once I'd turned it on, I could go downstairs, make a drink, and maybe even use the restroom because it takes that long to actually get started. But once you actually get into the game, what you're greeted with is some of the most eye-popping visuals that the 4K functionality of the Xbox One X has yet presented to me on my monitor. It is a beautiful game. That's not to say every single texture is perfect. There is pop-in and there are some janky textures, but as an overall presentation, this is a jaw-dropper. Essentially, you're using your train, the Aurora, to travel around Russia looking for a new place to live after it becomes apparent that there are other survivors of the Great War. And this journey on the train will lead you from forests to deserts to cannibal-infested bunkers. And each location is just as gorgeously presented as the last. The nature of a survival shooter is usually scarcity of ammo, and there is no question that you have a scarcity of ammo in this game. The desperation you feel to keep your weapons loaded in case anything comes jumping out at you from around the corner is absolutely daunting. I've never known such dread and tension as I have when going through a cavern or a tunnel or a bunker with only a very small light to guide my way, not knowing what on earth was down there and wondering if I had enough ammunition saved to deal with whatever it might be. Which brings us to difficulties. There is a host of different difficulties, everything ranging from Reader, which is essentially easy mode, all the way up to Ranger, which is a mode that, to be honest, I'll never have the guts to try because I can't imagine anything more horrible for a gaming experience. But if you're one of those gamers who wants to make sure that you're sweating in your seat and wants to be able to punch the air in victory when you know that you've achieved the unachievable, Ranger mode might just be for you. There aren't too many different weapon types to pick up, but rather than play it out like you have a gun that just keeps picking up ammo from everyone and everything as you go over it like a standard shooter, what you'll find is that everyone you kill can be looted for their weapons, which is very handy when you get discovered and all of a sudden stealth isn't an option. Touching back on the finicky gunplay, it is kind of disappointing to see such class representation of every aspect of a game except its first-person shooter mechanics. Gunplay is clunky, and impact is sorely unreliable. So many times you'll be standing in front of something, unable to miss, and somehow you'll miss. But these are things that can be ironed out with a few patches. Speaking of things that can be ironed out after a few patches, did experience a couple of game crashes. Thankfully, there's a really good smart save system that lets you save almost any time, much like Skyrim, and I appreciate that. And it's needed, because these crashes, if they come at the wrong time and you haven't been saving, you're gonna potentially have to go back quite far. Or at least you would do, except the game itself seems to have a pretty frequent save system, even when you're not remembering to. So that's a nice backup right there. Another thing I noticed that needs some ironing out via patches is crackly audio. Every now and then I would get static interference and not intentional interference when characters were delivering their dialogue or when I was just listening to the ambient noises around me. It would crackle in and out, very unpredictably and very annoyingly. Another thing that drove me absolutely nuts was projectile impacts, throwing knives in particular. There were instances where I would literally throw 5 to 10 knives at the same target and not a single one would hit that target, even though there's no visible way that the knives shouldn't have hit the target. You could then shoot the target and then run behind them and retrieve every single knife. You'd then pick up the knife and throw it at another target in a similar situation, making a similar stance, and they would just instantly die. Very confusing and very unreliable, which is unfortunate because one of the things that suffers as a result is the alright stealth mechanic of the game, in which you're trying to sneak around and avoid detection as much as possible in order to avoid as much conflict as possible. I have to say, this is pretty disappointing to me, because it seemed like the slightest sound and I could have an entire arsenal bearing down on me, and sometimes it wouldn't be my fault. For instance, I could use a throwing knife, the silent way to kill people from relative distance, and it wouldn't work. But my would-be victim will have noticed being hit by the knife regardless, and will then announce my presence to all of his friends, and there we go, stealth failed. Thankfully, there's no missions that depend entirely on stealth, and simply want you to choose it just to give yourself that extra challenge and that extra drive to succeed. Because if there were missions that were entirely dependent on stealth, I would consider this a real problem. And if it weren't for the subtitles of this game, you would never know what anybody is saying. Right from the first act, the frequent overlap of character dialogue is absolutely cumbersome. It is so irritating to listen to these excellent lines and these awesome characters only to have them talk over each other, and not in a natural interrupting kind of way, but in a your audio shouldn't have started playing yet kind of way. So without subtitles, it would be impossible to know what anybody was saying, and that is another thing that should probably be fixed. A final gripe I have with the game is that the first area you travel to after Moscow has a tendency to annoy if you're one of those people like me who wants to explore and get all the side quests. It contains a pretty terrifying monster catfish. And this monster catfish makes it nigh on impossible to use the really awesome rowboat system to cross the ice and get some of the side objectives done. But I was presented with the opportunity to finally destroy this monster, and I was very excited, thinking that I'd be able to return to the area where he kept killing me and then traverse it no problem, only to find that going there triggered an area-ending mission which I couldn't back out of and wouldn't let me go back for those side objectives. I guess little Nasia is gonna have to go without her teddy bear. I'd also really like to say that for a survival game, I would have liked to do more surviving, such as eating and drinking, and you will kill a ton of monsters, and very few of them actually can be harvested for anything useful. It's a shame there was no use for all these monsters, such as fabrics and crafting materials. It would have been a really good idea. Occasionally you'll fight monsters like leeches that'll let you raid them for chemical components, but it's very rare. It would have been nice to have a purpose for killing all these things, especially since it's going to use up a lot of my ammo, because the melee system when it comes to higher difficulties is near enough useless. And that brings us to the good stuff. Lots of tiny details in this game just took my breath away. Things like fresh corpses getting covered in snow during a storm. Lovely little effect there. Speaking of effects, the sound design of this game is one of the finest I've ever experienced. It creates an atmosphere and an ambience that makes me feel like I'm actually there. The sound of rain, the sound of wind and snow is all incredibly engrossing, and it absolutely brings you into the world. With its sound mixing and atmospheric design is the finest atmosphere I've ever played in a video game. It sucked me right in. Another thing the game does really well is reward exploration. If you want to go through the game doing the absolute bare minimum, that's okay. But if you want to take that extra step and kill a few more of those god-awful spider monsters, then it could be worth your while. You could find yourself with better armor or even a better mask. Speaking of masks, one of the most engrossing aspects of the game is swapping out your filter. You're often going to be walking into radiation zones, which means mask on, and your filters die quickly, so you better be ready to swap them out, and you better make sure you have lots of spares if you're going to go traversing where you shouldn't be traversing. Lovely little details that make you feel like you're really there are the ability to wipe your mask if it gets too covered in rain or blood or everything else. It's also possible that when you take enough damage, your mask will crack and you'll be forced to stick a temporary adhesive over it just to keep yourself from dying. Again, another thing that adds to the immersion that you'll be feeling. Things like gun decay are also very prominent, and they do more than you realize. As your guns get dirty, they start to malfunction, causing them to jam or fire in unpredictable ways if they fire at all. Another bit of amazing attention to detail. As I said before, the game offers different endings. I unfortunately hit myself a bad ending because I didn't realize that there were alternate endings, and it definitely would be in your best interest to try and go for the good ending, because the bad ending, well, it doesn't leave me feeling very accomplished, I'll tell you that. But overall, Metro Exodus has been an experience that I won't soon forget. There were times when I had to push myself to keep playing, and there were times where I didn't really want to play it. I wanted to play Far Cry, or I wanted to play Anthem, but I pushed myself to see it through, and I'm glad I did, because it did just keep getting better and better and more engrossing, and by the end I was completely immersed in what I was doing, and my objective in the game became as important to me as it would in real life. That's how immersed I was in the whole experience. Metro Exodus is a special type of game. It truly is difficult for me to rate a game like this because I don't know if this is the standard for survival shooters, but I'm smart enough to know that this was a special experience, and I think that a lot of people are going to get a lot out of it. It's a very good game. Metro Exodus is one of the finest shooters I've ever played, and not because the gun mechanics are good, but because of what it does to bring you into the world and give you that sense of urgency and desperation. I can't praise the game enough for bringing me into its world, and I'm definitely going to be awarding it the legendary card. It's earned it. Go pick this up if you have any interest in survival shooters, horror shooters, or open world shooters. This is definitely something for you to try out. In terms of a prey medal, I have to say that when you're going into this game, you can expect it on lower difficulties to take up to about 15 hours to complete. On higher difficulties, it could take anything up to 25 to 30 hours, depending on your personal skill in regards to the difficulty you choose. But with the replayability options of trying to go back and save more of your characters from being unceremoniously offed or getting that better ending, and not knowing really what to do in order to get that ending, it could see you play the game 2, 3, 4, maybe even 5 more times as you look for absolutely everything, try and find all the secrets and all the available upgrades. It's definitely got a lot of substance, and I'm going to award it the Silver Orca because I think this is a really big mouthful of content here, and you can make this last a long time if you're prepared to keep going back into the monster nests. What did you guys think of Metro Exodus? Have you played it yet? Are you going to? Too scary? Not scary enough? I found it very intense, and there were moments that, yeah, I was scared. Let me know in the comments below what you thought of Metro Exodus, or if my review has made you wonder if you should play it or if you should avoid it at all costs. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you liked it, tear that like button limb from limb, and if you want to be among the first to be notified of new content on the channel, go ahead and slam that subscribe button and ring the bell. I will see you guys in the next video. We're going to be re-reviewing Star Wars Battlefront 2 just in time for Anakin. Has it improved? Has it worsened? We'll find out. I'll see you next time.